So what I'm going to use to make this molded bowl, you're going to want to have some slip and a paintbrush or your finger, depending on what you like to use. That's for joining any pieces that you're going to be joining together. Pin tool is always handy for carving and cutting. If you're using slab, you'll need a metal rib. Any cookie cutters if you want to make some shapes inside of your bowl, and plastic wrap. So the first step when you're making a molded bowl is you want to line the bowl that you choose with plastic wrap. The reason that we do this is so that the clay doesn't stick to the bowl. If it sticks to the bowl, it's going to want to crack as it dries and your piece is going to be ruined. So make sure that you line your bowl with plastic wrap. For this project you need to use a large bowl, not a small bowl. So one of the green, pink, or clear larger bowls will be fine. I'm going to just put in another sheet here just to cover the parts of the wall that are still exposed. When you press your pieces into the bowl, you're going to end up with a plastic texture on one side. So as your piece is drying and it becomes leather hard, that's when you can remove it from the bowl and then use a damp sponge to get rid of that plastic texture on the outside of your bowl. So there's my bowl fully lined in plastic. I'm going to show you 3 different methods that you can make this molded bowl. I'm going to start out with slab. So if you want to see a demo on how to throw a slab, go back to one of the other videos on how to throw a slab. So I've used the metal rib on both sides of this slab, and I'm just going to coax this slab inside of the bowl. It's going to start to fold up on itself, and it may try to pull down the plastic. Just best you can, try and coax it down into the bottom of the bowl. I'm going to use a wire cutter and just straighten out the edge of the bowl. I'm cutting off the excess clay around the rim. So that it looks like this. From this stage you could use your wire rib and smooth out the inside texture of the surface. You don't want to use a wet sponge here because too much water will weaken the surface and potentially cause cracks in the bowl as it's drying. I've seen lots of pieces fall apart that way. So that's potentially one way that you could make your molded bowl. Once you have this slab base for your molded bowl, another thing you could do just to make it a little bit more decorative is to carve into your piece. So I'm just going to carve some rectangular shapes out of my piece. One thing, if you are going to use this method to carve out your molded bowl, you don't want to have the spaces in between the cutouts be too thin, because then that's a place where your clay is going to crack as it dries. Because as it dries, it's going to shrink. So any place where it dries more quickly will shrink first, and then you're going to end up with cracking in your piece. So if you are going to do this method, make sure that you cut out spaces that are far enough apart that you won't get that cracking. So this is a good distance, about 1 centimeter, maybe a little more. So I'm just going to cut out half of this slab just to show you a couple other techniques that you could use. So So if you didn't want to start with a slab base, you could use coil. So I'm just going to wedge this clay real quick and roll out some coils. If you are using coils, again, you still need to score and slip your pieces together, even though they're in the bowl. If you don't, then they will just fall apart. These coils need to be no thicker than the width of your thumb so that they'll dry properly. So make sure they're no thicker than the width of your thumb. So this is another method where you could line your bowl using coils. All of these coils were scored and slipped together, and so that they are not going to fall apart during the drying process. So far we've seen laying slab throughout the whole bowl and then possibly doing cuttings or carvings into it to add some decorative elements. You could also do that with coil, and I've seen people braid these coils, leave gaps in between the coils, so they've done little decorative swirly patterns, which is really nice. You just need to make sure that you're scoring and slipping any pieces together. I have one last method that I'm going to show you for the molded bowl. Again, this method requires a slab, so I'm just going to quickly throw it out. Small slab. Whenever you throw a slab, you always want to align the particles and smooth out the surface with the metal rib. This will prevent it from curling or drying awkwardly. So the last method that I've kind of seen with this molded bowl is to use cutouts or cookie cutter shapes to line the bowl. Again, if you're going to use this method, the pieces need to be scored and slipped together so that they don't fall apart when they're drying. So once you get your slab pieces cut out, you can just score and slip them into your bowl. Again, a thing to keep in mind when you're making this type of molded bowl with the cookie cutter shapes is that places where the cookie cutter shapes join need to be as thick as the clay itself, so that, again, as it's drying, it's not going to crack as it's drying. So if you have a very thin area joined together, that's going to dry first before the clay itself dries, the thickness of the clay. And then you're going to end up with a crack at that joint. There we go. So there's 3 different methods that you could use to make this molded bowl. In the end, you should end up with a really nice large bowl shape.